So Professor Tony Tam received his PhD from Chicago, and then he started his first job at Harvard. And then he moved on to the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Taiwan. And we now are really fortunate to have him in our midst. And he is one of the champions of computational social science in our faculty. Today, he's going to share with us some of his insights on how to optimize non-pharmaceutical interventions in Hong Kong. I read from his abstract that he's going to start by telling us what Hong Kong have done right, and then proceed to talk about what we can do to really win the war on COVID. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Tony Tam. Tony, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you for your Dean's generous introduction. Today, my talk is very special. It's a matter of life and death. But without being a medically trained person, I'm taking a very much social scientist approach to address a question that has been in my mind for quite some time. I'm not going to talk a lot about my own research or my research team's result, but instead I'll organize my talk around $1 million question that is, to me, is very sociological and is also very layman, close to the heart of everybody. And I would like to share with you what I learned from the literature on computational social science, especially a body of literature that devotes special attention to analyzing using a network approach to look at how the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic can be controlled, contained, and so on. So what is my $1 million question? Right now, the COVID epidemic is pretty well under control in Hong Kong. However, there's no room for us to be happy about it, because resurgence has been repeatedly predicted to be inevitable. There will be resurgence. There will be a fifth wave, maybe even a sixth wave coming. Hong Kong lacks herd immunity. And as we learned earlier on, we have a low acceptance rate for taking vaccine, being vaccinated. There's another difficulty facing Hong Kong. We lack perfect contact tracing. All the geographical technology we heard of are very important tools if people are open to being tracked before they became a victim of the virus. Hong Kong is additionally facing a difficult challenge. We are a very densely packed city. There are many hotspots and potential harm spots of the COVID virus. We are in a small pond with many dangers around us. Hotspots are places where potentially danger will arise. Those are called high-risk locations that Professor Kwan referred to earlier. When there are actual cases become infected and a large number of people affected, then that spot, that location, that venue become a harm spot. I think for Hong Kong, the more realistic goal for both for social scientists and for medical personnel would be not the elimination of any infection or, for that matter, any resurgence. Instead, the best hope we have is to contain it. If we can robustly contain the spread of the virus, we are successful. I call this system resilience. How can we optimize different strategy for intervention, given the limitations, difficulties we are facing in Hong Kong? How can we do that without large-scale lockdown? Everyone staying at home and that kind of scary situation. That is the focus of my presentation and the motivation behind it. Let me share with you the broad outline. There are two parts to my talk. One is to discuss something I thought is trivial, common sense. That is, how does lockdown of a city help with the prevention and control of the spread of the virus? It turns out there are good news and bad news. There are some top-notch publications in Nature, Science, and PNAS that speak to this issue. I want to draw some lessons for Hong Kong. And then I would turn to the concept of susceptibility to infection, using that as a conceptual leverage to understand there are indeed non-pharmaceutical interventions. Namely, even if we are far from having the achieving herd immunity through vaccination, we may still have a good chance of containing any future big surge in the COVID-19 pandemic in Hong Kong. How is it possible? The concept of susceptibility would be a way to go. So 2 parts: understand how lockdown really work, drawing lessons from it, and then through the concept of susceptibility, turn to strategies, levers for us to combat, fight the war, win the war without locking down the city. Now, Hong Kong is a puzzling case. Let me, as I said earlier, there are many hotspots and hotspots around Hong Kong. We are a small city. 7 million people cramming together. We cross our paths all the time. And despite the technology is being there, our government and our population and citizens are not so fond of, at least not achieving the capability of fully tracking people's mobility retroactively, spotting for any infected case where they have gone to, exactly where they have gone to, and so on. We cannot fully track people. And nonetheless, Hong Kong has been doing extremely well. Let me quote a figure from CNN for you just a couple of days ago. Look at this. The United States have so many, 33 million cases. 33 million. The rate is very high. For every 100,000, there are 10,000. It's about 10%. And the death rate is not small at all. They have nearly 600,000 deaths. That's a lot of people. A lot of people. We are fortunate. We are not in that ballpark. Nor are we close to someone what we consider as a peer, Singapore. Singapore has been doing, they have been proud of the way they control and prevent resurgence and so on. When there's resurgence, they cannot swiftly take action to lock down the city and also to track down mobility where people have been. Nonetheless, look at them. The infection rate is 1,000 per 100,000. That is not that low either. That is not that low either. And then next, by comparison, Hong Kong is only 158 cases per 100,000 people, right? That is a very good situation for Hong Kong. How can we do that? How did we get here? There's a mystery there. By understanding why Hong Kong, better understanding how Hong Kong could be so immune, we should be able to understand better our options, our policy options. Okay, the first study I want to introduce is a German study. It's published in PNAS, one of the top 3 natural science journals, complemented by another article from Science. The study is related to a concept of small world phenomena, which I summarize by the following. We used to think that the Earth is very large. People are very distant apart. people are clustered locally, and it takes many connections to get from one place to another place, from one person to randomly selected persons in another part of the world. But actually, the world turns out to be pretty small. That was a discovery by psychologists many years ago, and then proven by a sociologist, saying that it is entirely possible for people to be in a small world, even when there are few connections between them. What do I learn from the German study? I have to go faster because I've used up half of my time already. How do lockdown help with the war against COVID? Is it by stop going to work? No more crowd people converging at the same place, cutting the number of contacts? Well, the answer from China is using real data, using survey before and after the lockdown. Yes, indeed, lockdown of a whole city can cut contact rate from 14 to 20 per person per day in a day to just 2, being essentially restricting to family members. However, a recent study, further study from Germany using big data, 43 million mobile phone users in Germany before and after lockdown, they find that the biggest impact in Germany for lockdown is cutting short travels. The travels in general will be reduced, but long distance travels from one town to another town dramatically reduced. And that accounted for the big contribution of lockdown to the control of the epidemic in Germany. Let me show you this. For short distance, the darker curve is for short distance, decline in short distance travel. The green line is for very long distance travel. The longer it is, the quicker the job. This is from the German study. The German study also finds that it is inefficient and to do a complete lockdown. If it is a long distance being constrained, how can we apply it to Hong Kong? In the case of Hong Kong, there's no way we can apply the German lesson. Hong Kong is connected. Every town is connected to every other town. So in Hong Kong, we cannot learn anything from it. But what can we learn from it is actually highly targeted lockdown in the war against COVID is the most useful lesson. In Germany, you don't have to lock down the whole country. Cutting the intercity travel would already contribute a lot to the war against COVID. That is the biggest useful lesson from the German study. And for Hong Kong, the lesson is we need to do targeted lockdown, targeted containment. There's no way we can separate all towns from each other, but targeted lockdown would help a lot. Here is a graph from the German study. They show us that if you isolate a place, only those places that you found to be infected and you isolate them, it is better than doing a complete uniform lockdown in the town. And it is so useful that it can drive down the total number of contacts by a great deal. So much so that you can achieve a lot of this mobility restriction, reduction in the risk for the epidemic by targeted isolating of cases. Let me skip this one. Given that we have a hope of doing more efficient control instead of citywide lockdown, there's another way to help us to sustain successful control of the pandemic by reducing susceptibility to infection. not through even without full-scale vaccination. How can we do that? Let me show you this. Non-pharmaceutical interventions are good functional substitutes for pharmaceutical interventions, such as mainly vaccination. This is a lesson I learned from my team, led by Professor Huang Bo of GRM CUHK. From that lesson, we can do modeling of the actual behavior of the epidemic, the profile trajectory of the epidemic in China, and find out that if we can, even without vaccination, if we can manipulate social distancing in a wise way, we can drive down not only the number of infected cases, but we can also allow partial lockdowns, partial closure of schools and so on to be much, much shorter. By how much? By a degree of from 1/3 to 80% of the time. Say that's a big deal. Instead of locking down at home for several weeks, you can just spend a fraction of the time of locking down there to achieve something equivalent to herd immunity. For me to achieve that, I also draw on a study by Stanford team, very impressive Stanford team, and I summarized by several lessons. I have to be quick because I have only less than 5 minutes to go. The first takeaway from the Stanford study is the susceptibility of a whole district in the US, like a small town, is shaped by the flow between districts more than the behavior of people within that district. That means how the preventive behavior adopted by people within a district affects their internal rate of infection, but not the overall spread of the pandemic. This echoes one of the key lessons from the German study, and it reinforced the lesson that targeted isolation is the most efficient way to control. The second takeaway is there's a small, it has been suspected for a long time by case studies, but using hundreds of millions of people's billions of data from the United States, they're able to prove that it is a very small minority of super spreaders who are responsible for a large majority of infections. That is a big news. Just controlling the behavior of everybody is much less efficient than controlling and preventing super spreaders from being super spreader. This is the second takeaway. It's reinforced by a Boston study, but let me skip that to even the takeaway to the CUHK study. In our study, as I said, susceptibility can be proved to be equivalent to doing pharmaceutical intervention. Susceptibility can be reduced by physical distancing intervention in a way equivalent to pharmaceutical intervention. What do we find? Cities in China with medium population density, if it is only doing vaccination, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to reach herd immunity. However, if you maintain physical distancing in conjunction with partial vaccination, then we can achieve a control on the pandemic by using much shorter lockdown. That's what I said earlier. 80% of the time shortened. Secondly, cities with high population density, therefore more vulnerable to epidemic spread. The number of infections can also be well controlled, contained through moderate, not extreme lockdown, but moderate physical distancing. My colleague, Hongbo, would be ready to tell us more during the discussion if we need more information. Remember this, the million-dollar question is, can we optimize intervention without large-scale lockdown in Hong Kong? The good news is Hong Kong has been a success story. It's underappreciated. We have been able to do a mixture of non-vaccine-based intervention, able to beat back when the first few waves of the COVID-19 surge. Given that we have now a very low infection rate right now, the good news for Hong Kong is Hong Kong does not have to be super worried that we will soon be in big trouble, even when the vaccination rate is so modest, it's actually quite low. Why is that? Because based on the review of the recent literature, Hong Kong appears to be much more disconnected than it seems to be. There are apparently many invisible firewalls, or what I would call fire bricks, separating relatively stable contact networks that are neighborhood specific or worksite specific. And even though we have many hotspots, the hotspots are reasonably separated from each other by firewalls and fire bricks. Where are they? I cannot tell you. But that is the subject for the next computational social science project.
Thank you.
The good news is,
thank you,
can we wrap up with this final sentence? Yeah. By using more targeted and localized containment, isolation of cases, and widening our firewalls and fire breaks, we have a very good chance to continue our success story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the very inspiring presentation. And I think your message is very clear. I'm sure that the participants would like to continue the discussion at the round table. So in the interest of time, I would like to introduce you to the last speaker of this session, Professor Wan Wei. He received his PhD from Indiana University. And before joining us, he was a professor of communication at the University of South Carolina and is also a Changjiang chair professor. So it's really my pleasure to get to familiarize with Professor Wei's research. He is doing really exciting work on human communication. Today, I think we in the CUHK speech, we learned that there are fake news. So Professor Wei is going to share with us what type of fake news are more likely to be circulated, who are more vulnerable to being affected by the misinformation, and what can we do to manage the misinformation on social media so as to win the war of COVID. So now let's welcome Professor Wei.
Thanks again to CY for the introduction. I'm very, very happy and honored to be part of this forum this afternoon. What I present and talk about today is teamwork. So I'm speaking very much based on the collective work of my team, as well as some of the previous work I've done elsewhere. The metaphor of for this policy forum is winning the war on COVID. It seems to me, looking back in the past year and a half, I've been here on day one when the outbreak hit Hong Kong and our neighboring cities, everything. And looking back, that we are really fighting two types of viruses in the war against the COVID. One type is the virus itself. The other type is misinformation, which is another of the type of virus we have to fight in order to win this war. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how should we contain the spread of COVID-19 misinformation on digital media and social media platforms from research perspective, especially how we, from the drawing on the literature and research of communication, digital media, and social interaction. My talk will be organized in 4 parts. First, I would like to define the problem, and then I would like to define the problem from research needs, what we need to know, what we know, and also talk about the ongoing research that I and my team members right now are engaging. And to end this presentation, I will talk about how those data and evidence-based findings will be helpful to policymakers, for social scientists like us to develop programs for action to make a difference. So first, I would like to start with the definition of the problem. As I said, that infodemics refers to all kinds of information, has been a major part of this COVID-19 pandemic. It's everywhere and it's global in nature. We have seen a rising tide of infodemics. Why use the term in the informatics is a term that's used by WHO and other professionals in public health. It refers to information epidemics, the epidemics of rumors in the form of myths, dis, and malinformation of all sorts about COVID-19. And the research and our observation is that misinformation concerning COVID-19 seems to spread much faster than true information on social media, and they seem to attract more attention. Okay, it seems to be the truth that we have observed for generations is that bad news travels fast. Okay, so it's like a virus itself, infodemics, even debunked, even we have somebody verified the facts information and pointed out that information is false, misleading, and cannot be backed up with facts. Even that is made known to the public, those kind of disinformation still gets spread around in society. And you can imagine, because a lot of unnecessary anxiety on top of the anxiety and stress we have in dealing with the virus itself, okay? And it can cause public panic and the fear. Okay, here are a few examples of the pandemics we did concerning the pandemics, like the misinformation regarding the cure, regarding how do you limit the spread, and regarding certain shortages in shopping malls. Okay, as the pandemic goes and down the kind of different waves and different stages of combating this pandemic, we know the misinformation also changes as well as we go along in this path. For example, in the very beginning, most of this information was concerning how it started, okay, who started it, and how to keep yourself healthy and stop the spread of the virus onto yourself, all kinds of things like that. And later on, like currently, most of the disinformation is concerning the vaccines, how the vaccine, can have the exaggerated, unproven side effects on people who have taken them, and some other things about the logistics and distribution, all sorts of disinformation and unproved information about the vaccine and the campaign to have more people vaccinated. So I can imagine that as we move along to the next wave or to the end of really winning the war, there will be a new type of misinformation concerning the pandemic. Okay, so I would like to give a more summarized view about the likely and negative impact of COVID-19 misinformation. We talk about this from a social scientific perspective. We frame it mostly as cognitive and behavioral impacts. We talk about cognitive effects. We talk about anxiety, fear, worries, and stress. And also there's some kind of memory vulnerable to moderation. People do not get the facts straight, and the misinformation will confuse them about what is factual, what is true, and what is false. And most importantly, we think that the institutional trust will take a hit, will be a victim of the widespread misinformation. There'll be a lot of things that reduce our trust in authorities, in experts, in medical professionals, and in the institution itself. That will be a major damage to the society, because institutions hold us together, is the places that we count on to have a functional society. Okay, and behavior-wise, there were also some impacts, we believe, that caused by the misinformation, like people are hesitating to take the vaccine, and people do not follow the instructions to quarantine, to isolate. In the US, our previous study shows that wearing the mask was a struggle, both politically, behaviorally, and socially. So people will have reasons not to follow the public policy and rules for the good of everyone else. Okay, so those kind of behavioral consequences associated with the exposure, processing, and acceptance of misinformation are really the kind of things that cause a lot of concern. And Tony has talked about million-dollar questions. I think that those consequences caused by misinformation, the invisible virus, can also be multi-million dollars. So very understandably, in our field, communication and media study, people have done a number of work that trying to understand the misinformation itself and who are most likely to be vulnerable to this sort of information. So next, I would like to give everyone a quick overview about what we already know from the research. First, we know the characteristics of debunked COVID misinformation. In terms of the format, the information was not a totally fabrication. It's really based on some slight pieces of facts, of factual information, and reworked, reconfigured, rewritten to have a twist. Okay, so large big data analytical project shows that 59% of the misinformation is in various forms of rewritten, twisted, and context-free from existing and often true information. And 38% of the misinformation was completely a fabrication or false. So that was in the minority. So the majority was something like, so misinformation is some sort of like half-truth, unproven truth. It could be. So it's not totally something that people can tell right away that it's false. This is the really most concerning part from my perspective, because people can be easily fooled because that looks like true, but if you take a closer look, process information carefully, you realize it's not true. Okay, where does that come from? The research also find out the sources are mostly are more likely to be top-down than from bottom-up. Okay, the majority of the misinformation on social media was found to come from ordinary people, the average users of social media platforms, but most of those posts generated very little engagement. People didn't pay any attention or follow through or talk about them. So the majority come from average users, but they get no buzz, get no following. Okay, the misinformation from politicians, the top-down people, celebrities, and other prominent public figures made about 20% of the sources of misinformation, but they account for almost 70% of the total social media engagement in terms of likes, forward, comments, and other interactions. So on social media dynamics, the more attention, the more interaction, the more people will get involved, the larger its effect. So this study was drawn from a group of studies from Oxford's Reuters Institute. They analyzed all the known misinformation from a large database. So at the bottom of this, you can see the source. And who are the people who are more likely to spread the misinformation to others on social media? Other studies, individual studies, give us some preliminary idea to understand this, to shed light on this question. Some people share this kind of information on social media because they believe it's a civic duty, and it's fine to share something. It's so easy to share. The first study that gives us some idea about how people sense that information sharing is part of the civic culture, and as a citizen, it's important for you for something that's timely, urgent, maybe helpful to others, you share with that. They share mostly without verifying or checking the facts. Most of the behavior of sharing is share first. Maybe that's it. Most people share it and forget about it, don't do anything. Some people share and verify and check. Okay, so other people, second study by Choh-Ming and Vakati last year, they published 2 years ago, said sharing was a way to inform others and express their feelings. Sharing information about COVID to others in their network was seen as a way to say, we care. We'd like you to benefit from the information in this message. But they didn't realize, oh, do not verify the information might be misleading, maybe totally false, cause more harmful effects on the receivers. Other reasons reported by Marvick and Lewis, they include ideology. Some people are political groups are politically motivated. They would like to pass along those messages which are in line with their political belief, like they are against vaccination. Okay, so they will spread all the untrue information about side effects, death, and emergency treatment, all those information exaggerated and fabricated to other groups in their social network. Okay, ideology. Some people want to become rich out of this sharing business, so they will build up a large sharing and try to cash from that by selling advertising space, by selling links, all sorts of things like that. And other people are doing it for getting more attention to themselves in seeking and building a large follower. Okay, so those are the kind of reasons people, why they see something that is seemingly true but not true, but is relevant and timely, is concerning a global pandemic, they would share. They will forward and share with others. So let's talk about the receiver side. Who are the people who are most likely to receive them and being impacted or influenced by the message they are exposed to? Okay. Previous research have found that the low-income group, the minorities, and older people were the most vulnerable people to those kind of information, and also the less educated people. And finally, those who are more personally involved in a topic, like the benefits of vaccine shots and different types of vaccine shots. If people are highly involved personally on those controversial or policy issues, they are more motivated, more likely to pass along and be impacted by what they received from others. Our own research also found that people who are not cognitively engaged in information processing are less likely to detect misinformation, and as a result, they learn less from the true public health information. So in other words, people who just got the message, they didn't pay attention, they didn't read carefully, just, right now we all are dependent on the smartphone as information source and device to get information. And on that small screen, and people are used to just gliding through with their fingers all sorts of information very quickly. And when they do that, cognitively, their resources is stretched thin, or they do not commit much resources to what they are seeing. So as a result, they were not in a position, in a capacity to process information by thinking about it, relate to it, other things, and also dig into the facts. If they are not in this kind of cognitive engagement mood, they're most likely to see what they say, what they see is true, they will take it as true, and they are most likely to miss the true information. So that's what we have done from the little review of previous research. We have learned in general patterns some sense of what's going on with COVID-related misinformation. However, those studies are very informative, but they are less actionable because they cannot give us precise findings regarding which type and which particular misinformation message is the most popularly shared message, and who exactly are the influencers in spreading the infodemics, and who exactly are the individuals are vulnerable to this kind of information, and how do they interact, and what's the diffusion patterns from influencers to followers or back to influencers. All those kind of specific questions and more localized questions need to be begging for more additional follow-up studies. So this is where our collaborative research project kicks in. Okay, this is an ongoing project. Me and 7 other colleagues of mine engage in. We come from different disciplines and different trainings, including computer science, public health, qualitative research scholars, public relations, and big data analytics colleagues as well. So we put together on this project trying to understand the role of trust and information environment in a comparative analysis of COVID-19 infodemics in 4 Chinese societies: Hong Kong, Beijing, Singapore, and Taipei. So actually, this is what I'm going to report next is not actual data or findings yet. Actually, the past week was our first week of getting this project really onto the field. We just started this project after June 1st. So a lot of this is very much the design and rationale for setup and the way we are going to methodology to generate the kind of findings we want to address the questions I raised at the very beginning. So our goal is to stop the viral spread of COVID infodemics, understand how these waves of spread can be stopped and through intervention so that it will drop dead before it becomes much better, before it becomes snowballing and reach larger number of people who are likely to not benefit from the information, rather to get the consequences of harmful effects from this information. So our goal is to, through research, to help us to understand how to flatten the infodemic curve. Okay, infodemic spreads like viral. Okay, it just starts small, snowballing, and travels fast and amass very quickly. And overnight, it can reach millions of users. So, however, before it reaches that level or size or scale, if we can understand what type of message, who was spreading it, who was the first group to read them, and we can throw something to understand how people react to that. So if we can understand, some people will say they are more engaged and they don't send out this kind of false, questionable message to the next person, so that spread will stop right there. Okay, if stop right there, it will not reach the kind of plateau, reach the peak of millions of people were reached by this message. So to flatten the curve was a goal that raised by public health health communication professionals is part of the goal of our project as well. So we want to understand how do we intervene by giving people the reason to pause before they spread the information. Okay, like if a person relies on the information from trusted news sources, like RTHK, like SCMP, like BBC, all those established sources. We found that people who trust those on the social media sources of information, they are less likely to take what they read as true. Okay, so if the person, we can understand in this kind of scenario, that spread will stop right there. Okay, how should we go about to do this large scale study? As I said, it's a team-based research project.
Professor, our time is up. So thank you very much for your presentation. I think you have already built up our appetite for research findings. And I'm sure that you will have some more information you would like to share with us, but we can do that, I think, in the roundtable session. Thank you.
Sure.